As always, these are a somatic mindfulness inquiry. Be aware of what's happening in our body as we're working with it. As we move into looking at attachment styles, we're working specifically around friendship, earned secure attachment. I think we'd all like to be securely attached, but most of us didn't have the background for that as a child or in our earlier adult relationships. What are the qualities of secure attachment? You might be someone who was raised this way and you feel securely attached, and it gives you more flexibility, more responsiveness. When we look at going into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which really affects our friendships, all of our relationships, part of it is this: if we don't feel securely attached, we might be anxious. But if we do feel that way, then we're open to being there in the moment. We're not in a fight or flight or freeze. We more accurately assess safety and danger. So we're not underreacting, which is common in freeze, or overreacting. We're balanced. We're seeing clearly. We're alert. And we also have our full brain functionality. If we're not in a survival response, we have more options that we might not see otherwise. We have good boundaries, and we're able to really be vulnerable and engage deeply, and to walk away from people who are manipulative or who are abusive, to cooperate and compromise appropriately without fawning. So that's one of the things that we get to practice here in these Sunday groups, is that we get to do that. We get to practice being vulnerable. If it's not a perfect response, we're working with our window of tolerance as well, where we can allow for that too. There are many different ways that people describe this, and there are some subsets of these: secure, low anxiety, and low avoidance. The avoidant attachment style is low anxiety but high avoidance. We feel like we don't really need anybody. It's more important to not take a risk. So we're not worried about it, and we're not engaging. A fearful avoidant is somebody who has high anxiety and high avoidance. It's a really hard place to be. We don't trust people. We don't feel like it's safe enough to do that. And then the anxious style is high anxiety and low avoidance. One of the characteristics of that is that we kind of glom onto people. We feel really anxious. We are looking for others to help us feel secure. And we also kind of don't trust them either. So we have high anxiety and low avoidance. So as we're looking at these 4 categories, none of us are going to fall into any of these completely. We probably have qualities of each of these. Partly it depends on what's going on in our life. If we have a period of relatively low stress and we're feeling pretty attached and having fun with people that we're around, then all of these are going to settle a bit. And if we're having a period of high stress, or if we've just had something big happen, then we're going to probably have more anxiety, and these are going to get a little bit more intense. It's kind of like going into nervous system dysregulation. When we're calm and steady, we don't go into fight, flight, freeze, and fawn as much. And when we're feeling steadier, these aren't so much of a problem. So we're not looking at the most extreme. We're probably, most of us are kind of in the middle there somewhere. And it's helpful to know what our tendencies are. So we're looking at these different areas. Securely attached adults mostly feel good about themselves and of others. They have a lot of trust. I feel like people are basically good, and that the people I need will be here. So we get to share our thoughts, our emotions. We're not anxious. We're not worried about that. If something's going on, we're able to communicate about it, set a boundary, and be emotionally stable, comfortable with both intimacy and independence. So when I look at this, I think I've earned a lot of this secure attachment, and it's completely different from how I was for most of my life. So I can really attest to, in my experience, it's possible to change and to heal some of this. Avoidant adults think well of themselves, but not of others, struggle with emotional intimacy, and might kind of back away when relationships get too close. It's difficult. They don't form these deep emotional connections with friends. Because we're avoiding vulnerability, we also avoid authenticity. We don't feel so connected, but we might also be dismissive of other people. We don't depend on people and we don't share things. We crave independence and claim we don't need a relationship. So some of this, we can just look at it without shaming ourselves. We can see, okay, I see what I was doing there. I can see why it's difficult for me to really lean into that. Disorganized attachment, fearful, avoidant adults. This is one of the harder ones, both for ourselves and other people. We have that craving for closeness, but we're also afraid of it. We have that push pull. We have a desire for connection, but we struggle with trusting people enough to connect. This inconsistent behavior, being really engaged with someone and then kind of backing away, after that happens a few times, people tend to not trust us when we want to connect. There's always two people. And so one person pulls us in and then pushes away, and we start to get triggered. Our own attachments are getting activated there. And so trouble handling conflicts, have trouble expressing emotions, and that can lead to instability for sure in friendships. And also torn between a desire for intimacy and a fear of sharing emotions. So it's chaotic, it's back and forth, it's conflicted, and it's a hard place to be. So let's just sit with that for a moment. What are you noticing? Oh, yeah, I can see some of that, some of that. Where do you fit? Or do you have kind of like, oh, yeah, I'm right there. That's me. Anxious adults. Here we have this worry that we're going to be abandoned and seeking reassurance. So we feel insecure, but we tend to go to dependency. We have a fear of being left out, and so we're kind of clingy, jealousy, excessive neediness in friendships. And if you're the one who's doing that, it feels kind of uncomfortable. But if you're on the receiving end of that, it also feels uncomfortable. We might get impatient with people. It's like, grow up. Like, I can't do that for you. Figure this out yourself. Sometimes we get kind of mean when we're around someone who's anxious and who's always wanting our reassurance. So when we understand that this is actually a fear response, it's an anxiety. And what do we do with fear and anxiety? We move towards feeling safer, and then that lowers the anxiety. But often in friendships, it's a bit hard for us to keep that kindness, either for ourselves or for other people too. So we want intimacy. We have high levels of emotional disclosure. Often people will disclose everything and have a lot of need to be heard and to be seen, be loyal, and can be obsessive. So we tend to dependency and we want other people's approval. So this ties in a little bit to the fawning and the people pleasing, what we were talking about as well. Although it's not very skillful because we're in more of a survival response. We're not really sharing that kind of synchronicity of, I'm going to share a bit and they're going to share and I'm interested in them and I know they're interested in me, that we might have more secure relationship. So just to notice where you're at with that, does this describe you? Probably doesn't describe any of us 100%. Notice what you feel in your body as you're looking at that. The inner critic might come in here as well, feeling insecure. Well, of course, they wouldn't want to be my friend. I'm boring or I'm this or that. Look at some different areas that are affected by attachment styles in friendships. So you could use these with anything. You could use them with your colleagues at work or your family, however. But right now, we're working with friends around trust. Securely attached people trust their friends more easily. And anxious and avoidant people have more problems with trust. They fear abandonment or they're trying to avoid dependency. If you were to bring to mind a friend, the more specific, the better when we're doing this inquiry. Bring to mind somebody who you have a friendship with that might be a really wonderful friendship that feels really good, or it might be one that you're having a little trouble with. There's probably more juice in working with that. What level of trust is here on your part and maybe on the other person's part as well? Are you feeling more like you're trusting or you're afraid a little bit, avoiding dependency, fearing abandonment? And as you're doing this, just to notice what's happening in your body and in your breath, what's going on in the energy and sensations. Remember to breathe. If you feel like you're getting kind of too far into something, just open your eyes, come out, put the image on the wall, hold your hands, do something to bring yourself back. So we're always skirting on this edge of, I want to go right into it and feel it. And I also want to remain aware that right now I'm here doing an inquiry. So conflict resolution handles it constructively. We communicate openly, seek solutions. Again, probably all of us are there sometimes and not all the way there other times. But if you're feeling more anxious, maybe you're more emotional, you're afraid of losing friends during conflicts, and so you might just stuff it down and not say anything. You might overshare or seek that kind of reassurance. So it's hard to just be open and say, this isn't working for me. And if we're avoidant, we're going to probably just say, well, you know what? That friend's not that important. I've got other friends. I'm just going to let them be. And so that's also an option that could be healthy, but it might just be that avoidant attachment style. So as you're looking at your friendships, where do you generally fall in with that? So the common denominator is us in any series of friendships. What is your usual style now? Not 10 years ago or 50 years ago, but what is your usual style? And if you think about someone that you're having an issue with, a friend that you'd like for that relationship to be deeper or to be different, this might be something, just take a moment to look into. Is there something I need to communicate that I'm not? What's happening there? Or maybe you have a sense that they want to say something and they're not. Is there a way you could invite that? And in terms of emotional support, how balanced is the relationship? So if you're anxious, you might offer excessive support. You're trying to be liked. We're back into the people pleasing. Or you might demand a lot of support. And when that happens, we feel kind of unseen, like it's all about the other person. And avoidant attachment is more being uncomfortable, and we could downplay our own or others. We just don't want to talk about it. We don't want to get into the pain. We don't want to be around someone who's crying or who's in pain. A lot of these are underground, they're unconscious. People who've experienced a big grief will often say, the friend I really was counting on just kind of ghosted me. So that's probably someone with more of an avoidant attachment style. Or maybe that's us. Let's take a moment to sit with that. What is your general style with people? And then maybe specifically thinking of a friend, a specific person. And this could be quite obvious, or it might be a little bit more subtle. Just like, well, that person's always got a lot going on. I'm not going to bother them with mine. We're kind of dismissive of that. We downplay our needs. And then also, what is your balance of dependence and independence? Do you feel like you have excessive dependence on that person or someone on you? Or do you resist depending on friends? It's like, I got this. I've been hurt before. I've been let down. I'm not going to count on anybody. And we end up feeling quite isolated if we do that. And thinking of your style with everybody and then a specific person as well. Where are you on that scale? And then back to vulnerability. Sometimes, if we're anxious, we might disclose too much. We're trying to get somebody to feel close to us. And avoidant might avoid it altogether. We don't want to be exposed. We don't want to offer ourselves up for someone who might judge us. And if we're securely attached, we might be a lot more comfortable being vulnerable. And as you're looking at this as an overall approach with all of the people around you, we also need to be aware that not everybody is trustable. So this isn't a blind, I'm just going to share with everybody. Like Brene Brown says, you have to earn someone's trust. Generally speaking, where are you on that? And specifically, do you tend more towards being anxious or more avoidant? Take a few breaths. Take a look at all of those areas: trust, conflict resolution, emotional support, the balance between dependence and independence, vulnerability, how much we're able to share. Let's take a moment to sit with that. Is there something that you've just become aware of that you're like, whoa, I didn't realize that? Or is it more like, yeah, I know that's a problem for me. I can see that there's a big pattern there. Notice what you feel in your body. Is there any energy of that in your body? Probably there is. And if you have an inner critic attack going on, see if you could back that off. Relationships are the hardest thing. And we have all this conditioning from when we were a child and our earlier adult relationships. It takes a lot of healing to be able to have healthy relationships. This is something where we could really be careful about not letting the inner critic take over. We might feel shame, like I should be an adult, I should be able to do this better. Notice if there's any of that. We have all those tools. We can put images up on the wall, on a frame on the other side of the room. We can notice that we're looking at a bunch of examples of things that have come up. And we can also maintain awareness of the nuances of this. None of us fit in a box. We're looking at, I tend towards this, and how would knowing that help me? And then we can become aware of what we might want to do going forward. So deep breaths, look around the room, get yourself centered again. And then let's do this inquiry. Based on what you've known before and what we were just working with, what do you feel is your primary attachment style? And we're working with a specific friend now. What's the primary attachment style of the friend that you're working with? And if there's some dynamic that you want to change, like for instance, you're not feeling very connected with them because they don't really share or they seem to back away, you feel anxious and clingy, you don't like that feeling, or maybe they do. What is some dynamic and how is that influenced by your attachment style and theirs? And getting into your tolerance for their attachment style as it conflicts with yours. If someone's avoiding you, how do you tend to respond to that in your mind? If they're suffocating you, if they're asking for too much reassurance, if they're really anxious all the time, how do you feel about that? How do you tolerate that? Can you stay grounded or do you get kind of impatient? How might you address that with them? When you constantly ask me for reassurance that we're good, that we're friends, I don't like that. It makes me feel, how might you address that in a conversation with the person? And it might not be a possible conversation, but just as an experiment, what might you say? What would you like to change and how might you say that? And how do you feel in your body when you think about doing that? So this is part one of this. Next week, we're going to spend a lot more time doing some slow motion walkthroughs of that, but just as a starting point. And then to get into maintaining a connection, what could you appreciate about them, even if it doesn't really work so well for you? And it might be that you really understand their background and that you can tolerate a little bit more than you would if you didn't understand them, if you didn't care about them. And then again, next week, we'll spend a bit more time on this as well. How can we help each other develop earned secure attachment? So, if this is a friend who you can really connect with on that level of this is working for me, this isn't working for me, this is what I'm noticing about myself, this is what I'd like to talk with you about. And then how can we work with what is to get to a point of feeling more secure? We come back into feeling some compassion and kindness for yourself, for your friend. This is hard. It's high risk. Friendships are really important to us. I actually don't have a lot of deep friendships because I tend to avoid it. How could I work with that? There's just so many different nuances and variances here. How could we give ourselves credit for being here and working with this would be very helpful.